really appreciates the spot that he's in now. All right, welcome in. It's the Breer Report for June the 3rd. We have a mandatory veteran minicamp this week. Just one of those. The Chicago Bears under first-year head coach Ben Johnson will have their 3-day minicamp starting today. Then we got a bunch more next week, a bunch more the week after that, and then the NFL breaks for summer. We got 3 topics we want to get to on a little bit of a slower time in the NFL calendar here in the Breer Report today. Our first topic, Frank Ragnow, the Lions' 3-time All-Pro center, has retired after just 7 NFL seasons. Ragnow has been one of the rocks in the build of the Lions under Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes. First and foremost, I think he should be remembered as one of the best centers of his era. He was a second-team All-Pro 3 times. He's leaving the NFL and having played at a very high level, All-Pro the last 2 years. And really the heartbeat of that Lions rebuild has been through the offensive line. They had Ragnow and Decker there, Taylor Decker, their left tackle there, when Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell got to Detroit in 2021. Their first draft pick was Penei Sewell. That group has been the best offensive line in football over the last couple of years. And again, really the foundation of the rebuild. So Frank Ragnow should be remembered as one of the best players at his position of his era. And also, again, a foundational piece of a franchise that had struggled for a long, long time turning things around. So that's first and foremost what Frank Ragnow leaves behind as far as legacy goes. Then I think we can dig into a little bit more of what this means for players across the NFL. And to me, the way I look at this, just 7 years in the pros, I think this sort of is a good extension of where we've been over the last decade and a half, really. We've had a bunch of early retirements. Patrick Willis was an early retirement. Calvin Johnson right there in Detroit was an early retirement. And I actually think these things are good. And there are 3 reasons why. I think it's a good development for players. I think it's a good development for the sport. The 3 reasons why. Number one, the players have more information on their own health. And this isn't a guessing game as far as how they're going to feel in 20 or 30 years. They have solid information on where they are from a physical standpoint. And that played into Frank Ragnow's decision. He said it right there in his statement that he had spent so much time trying to convince himself that he felt good when he just didn't, and he didn't want to do that anymore. Players have way more knowledge of what sort of damage is going to do to their long-term health. Whether it's the head injuries, whether it's ligament damage, knees, ankles, hips, all of those things, how that's going to affect them later in life. And you hear players oftentimes, like I think a lot of people would approach this and saying, well, I want to be able to pick up my kids when they're 4 or 5 years old. I want to be able to play golf when I'm in my 40s. I want to be able to shoot hoops with my kids when they're teenagers. Those things, those very human things, are all pieces of the big picture for players like Frank Ragnow. And so I think, you look at this situation and, where he does bring up how he feels. It's not just about how he feels right now. It's about his long-term health. And having the information on your long-term health empowers you to make decisions that can make your life better 20 or 30 years from now. Number 2, a lot of these guys have a better idea of what post-football life is going to look like for them. There's tons of sad stories of players from the 70s or 80s who were not prepared for what life looked like past their times as professional football players. And so they feared that. And so there were a lot of guys who stuck around the league, who hung around the fringes of the league, because they just had no idea what their identities would be without football. Guys still struggle with that. Like, that's not gone. When, you've been told that you are top of the world at something, and when it's been a part of your identity since you were 10 years old, and then when someone taps you on the shoulder when you're 30 or 31 or 32 years old and says you can't do it anymore, that can be a really jarring thing. But I think more guys have prepared themselves for what their pro football life is going to look like, which allows them the freedom to make these decisions. Because if you have something to look forward to past what your professional life is in the here and the now, well, then it's going to be a little easier to detach from the thing, again, that you've identified with, that people have identified with you for your entire life. So that's number two. And then number three is a really simple one, which is having the financial wherewithal to walk away and to have made this sort of money that would tell it that would allow for you to live a very comfortable life going forward and not have to worry about the fact that your next job probably isn't going to pay as much as you were making as a professional athlete. Frank Ragnow, he was a first round pick. He got a big second contract that made him the highest paid center in football. He's going to be fine going forward. So again, for those three reasons, because of the information guys have on their long-term health, because of the preparation guys have for what post-football life is going to look like, and because of the money that these guys now make, they're empowered to make these sort of decisions earlier. Again, the guys like Calvin Johnson and Patrick Willis, when they made those decisions, were outliers. We're seeing it more and more with guys like Frank Ragnow now. All right, number two, our second topic for this week is the Cleveland Browns quarterback situation. I had a great conversation with Joe Flacco late last week about the situation that he's in and how he feels sort of liberated to go out and enjoy the game. And this kind of plays back into what we were just talking about with Ragnow, where because of his age, because he's seen so much, because he has experienced so much, because now he's gone 4 or 5 years where he's had to fight just to have an opportunity to go on the field. He really appreciates the spot that he's in now. The last time that Joe Flacco was at this stage of the NFL calendar in the spring with an opportunity to become the team's week one starting quarterback was actually now 6 years ago in Denver in 2019. He, of course, did stints with the Eagles. He did a stint with the Jets. He was with the Browns a couple of years ago, but he didn't sign with the Browns until deep into the fall. And then last year, he went to the Colts as sort of a backup / mentor to Anthony Richardson. Now, in some of these situations, the last 2 years, of course, he winds up playing a bunch, but it wasn't with the opportunity to make a team his own. And now he's got that opportunity again. And he talked to me about how much appreciation he has for that opportunity to go out and be the starting quarterback and be the guy again. Will it work out? We'll see. But I think for Joe Flacco, now he's looking at all the little things that he does to prepare himself for the year. He said he's had his same routine really going back to the lockout. He's been with the same trainer since the lockout in 2011. So he has his routine. He appreciates the little stuff that he does that does to get himself ready to show up for our team's offseason program. Now he's in the offseason program. He's appreciating the little things that he's getting to do now to prepare himself for the season. The way he explained it to me was, it's not really that I have to do these things anymore. It's that I get to do these things. It's that I get to be an NFL quarterback. So it's cool to hear that perspective. And as he explained it to me, they're really splitting up the reps pretty evenly right now. I did ask him flat out, do they have to narrow this down by the summer? He said he has his own thoughts on that, but he was going to leave it up to Kevin Stefanski to talk about what that might look like going forward. And so I think he sort of alluded to the fact that, it's going to be tough if you got 4 quarterbacks in that mix when you get to the end of July. And I'd agree with him on that there's going to have to be some winnowing of this whole thing where they're going to have to at least get it down where there are a couple guys at the front of the line getting more reps. That is the best thing for the other 10 guys in the huddle. It's probably the best thing for the football team. And so this is a really critical couple of weeks for the Browns quarterbacks. And, it's Joe Flacco versus Kenny Pickett. It's also Shedeur Sanders versus Dylan Gabriel. It's those two guys versus the 2 veterans. And it's not just those 2 guys versus the 2 veterans to see if one of those 2 guys, Gabriel or Sanders, can start. It's also seeing if either of those 2 guys are ready to be the backup, because the picture could look different if one of those guys, either Gabriel or Sanders, is ready to be the backup. That will give you the freedom to walk away from one of the veterans. So lots of moving parts there. And I think this is, again, a very important couple of weeks, maybe the most important couple of weeks of any team across the league, because of the importance of the quarterback position. And because I do think that you are going to have a general idea of what this is going to look like going into training camp. So again, Joe Flacco's got great perspective on the whole thing, but he's right in the mix there with everybody else. He did mention, at least hinted at it, that he might be getting a few less reps than the other guys because he doesn't need them as badly. But he seemed to be okay with that. Finally, our third topic for this week. This is a trade that may have flown a little under the radar at the end of last week, but Bryce Huff is headed from Philadelphia to San Francisco. The cost is a fifth round pick that can become a fourth round pick if Huff plays a bunch and produces and all of that. They're also splitting the salary. So this is, I mean, one thing I've always respected about the Eagles is that the Eagles now have sort of wiped the slate clean. They signed Bryce Huff last year to a 3-year, $51 million deal. They felt like it was a rare opportunity to get a guy who's an ascending young pass rusher, was coming off of a 10-sack season at a premium position, who was only available because the Jets had multiple first-round picks that they were trying to get on the field at the position in Jermaine Johnson and Will McDonald. So they got aggressive. They swung. They missed. And if you want to talk about why they missed, to me, this is pretty simple. I don't think he was a great fit for Vic Fangio's defense. Vic Fangio's defense, the edge players are guys who are playing standing up. They're dropping into coverage. They do rush a bunch, but they have to be able to do a bunch of different things. And Bryce Huff in a vacuum has to be going forward. Like, that's the whole thing with him, is that he is an aggressive upfield player. And so that limited what he was able to do in Vic Fangio's defense. Of course, injuries played into that as well. And when the Eagles looked at the bigger picture of it, they got Jalix Hunt, who they're trying to get more reps to, a rookie last year. Of course, Nolan Smith came on at the end of last year. And Jihad Campbell's got some ability to play off the edge too, as a rookie. So they do feel good about the young group of players they have in there. Figure you're not going to gum up the works if you're not trying to fit Huff into that mix anymore. So I really respect this about the Eagles being able to move forward and basically look at the signing of Bryce Huff as a sunk cost in a championship season. Easier to do that, of course, when you've won a Super Bowl. And then on the Niners side of this, I mean, I think Robert Saleh, their new defensive coordinator, is a big factor here. He actually coached under Vic Fangio in Houston, and he coached Bryce Huff in New York from 2021 to 2024. So he's got a really good idea of what Bryce Huff is as a player. Or he coached until 23. He's got a really good idea of Bryce Huff as a player. Not only that, he's got a good idea of why Bryce Huff didn't work in Philadelphia. So he's bringing in Bryce Huff. They've rebuilt their defensive line. It was Nick Bosa and not a whole lot else going into the offseason. Now they've spent 3 top 75 picks on defensive linemen, Mikael Williams, of course, being the headliner with a couple of defensive tackles after that. And now they're adding Bryce Huff into this mix, into a defense that is an excellent fit for him. They're doing it on the cheap, and they're handing him to Chris Kasarik, their defensive line coach, who has done this a million times with a million different pass rushers. They've got Yetur Gross-Matos there now, Arden Key. There are a ton of guys that they brought in there over the years that have really worked out as reclamation projects. Key is a good example of it, of a guy who came in and was a distressed asset, and they're able to get him back up on his feet and get him going, and he winds up getting paid somewhere else. Leonard Floyd was another example of a guy who they were able to bring in at a little bit of a lesser cost and get a great season out of. And so now the next guy becomes Bryce Huff. It really gives them a chance to be excellent on third down, with Mikael Williams potentially kicking inside. And then you've got Nick Bosa, of course, as your premier pass rusher. Bryce Huff as a real matchup problem on the other side. The Niners have set themselves up to be pretty good defensively when you consider all that they've lost. And losing Drake Greenlaw and Hufanga and Ward and Floyd and all these guys going out the door. I think they've done a nice job resetting. And again, I think it's a perfect spot for Huff to go back and have a renaissance season. So to me, like, this is a good job by the Eagles of taking on a sunk cost. It's a good job of the Niners of finding a distressed asset who could fit them. And it's a great spot for Huff to revive his career. So on paper, at least, it does look like this could be an everybody wins situation. If, of course, you're willing to concede that the 3-year, $51 million contract the Eagles did with Bryce Huff, that wasn't going to turn around. So it was time for Philly to move on. Appreciate you guys coming out. We'll have a mailbag for you and another full-on Breer report later this week. any feedback you guys got, any questions you have for the mailbag, you can get them to me at Albert Breer on Twitter, at Albert R. Breer on Facebook, and at Albert_Breer on Instagram. Appreciate you guys coming out, and we will see you later in the week.